Okay, you guys remember in the first part of the chapter, Manoli was still at the gather, right? Yes? Okay. The next morning, looking from her window to the place where the gather had been held, she saw few traces of litter, only the dew-glistening, trampled earth of the dancing square. Holders trudged toward the fields, herdsmen were guiding their beasts to the meadows, and apprentices dashed up and down the Holdway on their errands. Down the ramp from Fort Hold paced a troop of leggy runners, fresh after a day's rest, fretting against the slow pace to which their riders held them until they were past the ambling herd beasts. They disappeared in a cloud of dust down the long road to the east. Manoli heard the noise from the apprentices' dormitory, and a soft, all but inaudible crealing closer by. She threw on her clothes and dashed down the steps. "Knew you wouldn't miss, Manoli," said Sylvina, meeting her on the steps from the kitchen. She carried a tray, which she thrust ahead. "Do take this up to the harbor like a pet, would you? Camo's just about finished wielding that chopper of his for your fare." Manoli's polite tap at the master harper's door brought an instant response. He had a fur clutched around him and an insistently creeling fire lizard clawing at his bare arm. "How'd you know?" he asked, delighted and relieved to see her. "Thank goodness you did. I really can't appear in the kitchen wrapped in a sleeping fur. There, I'm stuffing your face, you bottomless pit. How long does this insatiable appetite continue, Manoli?" She held the tray for him so he could feed Zare as they crossed the room. She slid the tray onto the middle of the stand table and, anticipating the harper's own requirements, offered Zare his next few pieces of meat while Master Robinson gratefully gulped down steaming claw. He grabbed a piece of bread, dipped it into the sweeting, had another sip of claw, and then, his mouth full, waved at Manoli to leave.
What is?
I think it's supposed to be like coffee. There's a recipe for it. You want to try it sometime? Okay. "You've got your own to feed too. Don't forget to work on your song. I'll require a finished copy later this morning." She nodded and left him, wondering if she ought to check and see if Sibel was managing with Kimi. He was, seated at one of the journeyman's tables with more than enough willing assistants. Her fire lizards waited patiently at the kitchen steps with Peemer and Camo. Once her friends had been fed, she was enjoying a second cup of claw when Domic came striding across the court toward her. "Manoli," he said, frowning with irritation, "I know Robinson wants you to finish that song for him, but will it take all morning? I wanted you to go through that quartet music with Sibel, Talmor, and myself. Marshall has the girls for theory on first day, so Talmor's free. I'll never get that quartet ready for performance unless we have a few more good rehearsals. I'll start the copy right now, only what? I don't have any copying tools." "Is that all? Finish your claw quickly. I'll show you Arnor's den. Just as well I'm taking you," Domic said, guiding her toward the door in the opposite corner of the court. "Robinson wants the song done on those sheets of pulped wood, and Arnor won't hand them out to apprentices." Master Arnor, the hall's archivist, occupied the large room behind the main hall. It was brilliantly lit with glow baskets in each corner, in the center of the room, and smaller ones depending above the tilted work tables where apprentices and journeymen bent to tasks of copying faded record hides and newer songs. Master Arnor was a fusser. He wanted to know why Manoli was to have sheets. Apprentices had to learn how to copy properly on old hide before they could be entrusted with the precious sheets. What was all the hurry about? And why hadn't Master Robinson told him himself if it was all this important? And a girl? Yes, he'd heard of Manoli. He'd seen her in the dining hall, same as he saw all the other nuisancey apprentices and holder girls, and oh, well, all right, here was tool and ink, but she wasn't to waste it now, or he'd have to make more, and that was a lengthy process, and apprentices never paid close attention to the simmering, and if the solution boiled, it would be ruined and fade too soon, and oh, he didn't know what the world was coming to. A journeyman had been unobtrusively assembling the various items, and he handed them to Manoli, giving her an amused wink for his master's querulousness. His smile also conveyed to Manoli the tip that the next time she should come directly to him, rather than approach his cranky master. Domic got her away from the old archivist after the barest of courtesies. As they walked back to the hall entrance, he again directed her not to be all morning at the copying, or he'd never get the new quartet sufficiently rehearsed before the festival. As he opened the door to the main hall, she heard the master harper's voice and sped up the stairs. As she worked in her room, her concentration was penetrated now and then by voices raised in discussion in the hall below. Absently, she identified the various masters: Domic, Morshall, Durant, the master harper, and, to her surprise, Sylvina, and others whose voices she couldn't recognize as readily. As the conversations apparently had to do with posting journeymen to various positions about the country, she paid scant heed. She was, in fact, just finishing the third and looser interpretation of the song when a brisk tapping at the door startled her so much she almost smeared the sheet. At her answer, Domic strode in. "Haven't you finished yet?" She nodded to the sheet, spread out to dry. Scowling with exasperation, he strode across the room and picked up the nearest sheet. Before she could warn him about damp ink, she noticed that he took the sheet carefully by the edges. Yes. You copied neatly enough to please even old Arnor." "Yes, now." He was scanning the other sheets. "Traditional forms all duly observed. Not a bad tune at all." He gave her an improving nod. "Bit bare of chord, but the subject doesn't need musical embellishment. Come, finish that sheet too." He pointed to the one before her. "Oh, you have. Fair enough." He blew gently across the sheet to dry the last line of still glistening ink. "Yes, that'll do. I'll just be off with these. Take your guitar across to my quarters, Manoli, and study the music on the rack. You're to play second to guitar. Pay special attention to the dynamic qualities of the second variation." With that, he left her. Her right hand ached from the cramped position of copying, and she massaged it, then shook her fingers vigorously from the wrist to relieve the strain. "Now," she heard the master harper's voice from the room below, "the point is that all but one of the formalities has been observed. Admittedly, there's not been much time spent in the hall, but an apprenticeship served elsewhere under a competent journeyman has always been admissible. Does anyone wish to register any reservations about the competence of that journeyman?" There was a short pause. "So that's settled." "Ah, yes, thank you, Domic. Now, Master Arnor," and Manoli lost the sound of his voice as he evidently moved away from the window. She was uncomfortably aware that she was not only an inadvertent eavesdropper on craft matters not her business, but disobedient to Master Domic's orders. Not that she didn't wish to follow them. She picked up her guitar. Playing with Talmor, Sibel, and Domic was a pure delight. Had Master Domic meant to intimate that she'd be part of that quartet in a performance? Well, if yesterday was any sample of being a harper, yes, she probably would be performing in that quartet. New as she was to the harper hall, that was part of being a harper, after all. When Manoli entered Domic's quarters, Talmor and Sibel, keenly disposed on his shoulder and not looking too pleased to be shifted from the crook of his arm, were already discussing the music. They greeted her cheerfully and asked if she'd enjoyed her first go in a gather at Fort Hold. They both laughed at her enthusiastic replies. "Everyone's better for a good gather," said Talmor. "Except Morshall," said Sibel, and, glancing sideways at Talmor as if they shared some secret, rubbed the side of his nose. "Let us play, Journeyman Sibel." Manoli thought that Talmor sounded reproving.
Elliot's wearing my shirt."
"By all means, Journeyman Talmor," said Sibel, not the least bit perturbed. "If you will join us, Apprentice Manoli." The brown man gestured elaborately for Manoli to take the stool beside him. As Manoli checked the tuning of her guitar, Talmor turned the sheets of music on the rack. "Where does he want us to start?" "Master Domic told me to study the dynamics of the second variation," said Manoli with helpful deference. That's right, said Talmor, snapping his fingers before he flipped the correct sheets to the front. "At the beat, then." "Sweet shells, he's changing the time in every third measure. What does he expect of us?" "Are the dynamics difficult?" asked Manoli, feeling apprehensive. "Not difficult, just Domic all over," said Talmor with the sigh of the long-suffering. But he tapped the appropriate beat on the wood of his guitar and gave a more emphatic fifth beat for them to start. They'd had a chance to go through the second variation once before Domic entered the room. Nodding courteously to them, he took his place. "Let's start at the beginning of the second variation, now that you've had a chance to play through it." They worked steadily, going straight through the music once. The second time, they paused frequently to perfect the more difficult passages and balance the parts. The dinner bell punctuated the brisk notes of the finale. Talmor and Sibel put down their instruments with small sighs of relief, but Manoli fingered the final 3 chords softly before she laid her instrument down. "Does your hand hurt?" asked Domic with unsuspected solicitude. "No, I was just wondering if the string was true." If you heard a sour sound, it was my stomach, said Talmor. Too much gathering? Asked Sibel with little sympathy. No, not enough breakfast, thank you, replied Talmor with the briskness of someone being teased. He rose and left the room, followed closely by the silently laughing Sibel. Master Schoneger has you this afternoon, Manoli? Asked Domic, motioning for Manoli to come with him. Yes, sir. Well, then you'd have to continue that voice instruction anyway, he said in a cryptic fashion. Manoli decided he must be wishing to have her practice with him more steadily, but Master Robinson had been specific. Her mornings were scheduled to Master Domic. Afternoon she was to go to Master Schoneger. When they entered the dining hall, the room was already well filled. Domic turned to the right, towards the master's table. Manoli caught one glimpse of Master Marshall, already seated, his face set in the sourest line she had yet seen on the bad-tempered old man, so she looked quickly away. Pona's gone, Pemor pounced on her from the left, his face wreathed with smug satisfaction. So I can sit with you near the girls now. Adiva said I could because it was Pona who got snotty. Adiva says, will you please sit with her? Pona's gone? Manoli, both surprised and nervous, permitted Pemor to pull her toward the hearthside table. There were 2 empty places, one on either side of Adiva, who smiled hesitantly as she saw Manoli approaching. She beckoned to the seat on her right, away from the other girls. See? Pona is gone. She got taken away a dragonback. Pemor added, his pleasure in her departure somewhat alloyed by the prestigious manner of her going. Because of yesterday? The thin knot of worry in her middle grew larger and colder. Pona in the cot, contained by the discipline of the Harper Hall, was bad enough, but in her grandfather's hold, pouring out acid vengeance, she was much more dangerous for Harper apprentice Manoli. Nah, not just yesterday, Pemor said firmly, so don't you go feeling guilty about it. But yesterday was the final crack, the way I heard it, bearing false witness against you, and Dunca's been raked over by Sylvina. That pleased her no end. She's just been itching to take Dunca down. Timony was straddling 3 seats across from Adiva and gesturing urgently to Manoli and Pemor to take them. You sit with Timony, Pemor. I'm going to sit next to Adiva. Looks like she's being put on by Briala with that empty seat and all. As she stepped to the place, she got Briala's startled, antagonistic glance. The dark girl nudged her neighbor, Amania, who also turned to glare at Manoli. But Manoli smiled at Adiva, and as she stood by the tall craft girl, she felt Adiva's hand fumble for hers and the grateful pressure of her fingers. Stealing a sideways glance, she noticed that Adiva's eyes looked red, and her cheeks showed the puffiness of recent and prolonged weeping. What?
There's a tooth coming in right here.
Can you wait till I'm done reading? Can it wait until I'm done reading?
Yeah, I guess.
Great. The signal to be seated was given, and the meal began. If Manoli felt too self-conscious and Adiva was too upset to talk, Pemor suffered no inhibitions and babbled on about how he'd made his marks count. I got 9 more bubbly pies, Manoli, he told her gaily, 'cause the baker thought they were for you, me, and Camo. I did share with Timony, didn't I, Tim? And then I won a wager on the runners. Anyone with half an eye could tell the one with the sore hoof would run faster, so he wouldn't have to run as long. So how many marks did you come back with? Ha! Pemor's eyes flashed with his triumph. More than I went to the gather with, and I'm not saying how much that is. You're not keeping it in the dorm, are you? Asked Timony, worried. Ha! I gave it to Sylvina to keep safe for me. I'm no fool. And I told the entire dorm where my marks are, so they know it's no good putting on me to find out where I hit them. I may be small, but my glow's not dim. Briala, who was pretending to ignore them all, made a disagreeable sound. Pemor was about to take umbrage when Manoli kicked his shin to warn him to be silent. You know what, Manoli? And now Pemor leaned across the table, exuding mystery as he glanced from her to Adiva and Timony. They're posting journeymen. Are they? Asked Manoli, mystified. You ought to know. Couldn't you hear anything in your room? I saw the windows in the main hall open, and you're right over them. I was busy, Manoli said sternly to Pemor, and I was brought up not to listen to other people's private conversations. Pemor rolled his eyes in exasperation for such niceties. You'll never survive in the Harper Hall then, Manoli. You've got to be one jump ahead of the masters and the Lord Holders. A Harper's supposed to learn as much as he can. Learn, yes. Over here, no, replied Manoli. And you're an apprentice, added Adiva. An apprentice learns to be a Harper by overhearing his masters, doesn't he? Demanded Pemor. Besides, I gotta think ahead.
I gotta be good at something besides singing. My voice won't last forever. Do you realize that only 1 out of hundreds," and he waved his arms in such an expansive gesture that Timony had to duck, "of boy sopranos have any voice when they hit the change? So if I'm not lucky, but if I'm good at digging things out, maybe I'll get posted like Sibel and have a fire lizards to take important messages from hall to hall." Then Pemer froze and cautiously turned to look at Manoli, his eyes wide with consternation. She laughed. She couldn't help it. Timony, who had obviously heard Pemer's long-range plan before, gulped so fiercely that his neck cartilage bobbed up and down his throat like a net float in a fast current. "I really do like the fire lizards, Manoli, I really do," said Pemer, trying to undo the indiscretion and reinstate himself in Manoli's good graces. She couldn't resist a pretense of disdain and ignored him, but his expression was so genuinely panic-stricken that she relented sooner than she intended. "Pemer, you've been my best and first friend in the hall, and I really do think my fire lizards like you. Mimic, Rocky, and Lazy let you feed them. I may not be able to help, but if I do ever have any say in the matter, you'll get an egg from one of Beauty's clutches." Pemer's exaggerated sigh of relief attracted attention from the other girls, who were still pretending that the end of the table didn't exist. Platters of stewed meats and vegetables were now being served, and Manoli took advantage of the general noise to ask Godiva how things were with her. "All right, once the furor died down. I rank the rest of them, even if rank is not supposed to be a consideration while we're at the Harper Hall." "You're also the best musician of the lot," said Manoli, trying to cheer Godiva. She sounded very depressed, and she must have been crying a lot to have such puffy cheeks. "Do you really think I can play?" asked Godiva, surprised and pleased. "From what I heard that morning, yes. The others are hopeless. If there's no reason you have to stay at Dunca's when you have free time, maybe you'd like to come to my room. We could practice together if that would help." "Me? Practice with you? Oh, Manoli, could I please? I really do want to learn, but all the others want to do is talk about the fosterlings at the hold and their clothes and who their fathers are likely to choose as husbands for them, and I want to learn how to play well." Manoli extended her hand, palm up, and Godiva gratefully seized it, her eyes sparkling, all traces of her unhappiness eased. "Just wait till I tell you what happened in the cot," she said in a confidential tone that reached only Manoli's ears. She saw Pemer cocking his head to try and hear and waved him away. "It was a treat, a rare treat, what Sylvina said to Dunca," and Godiva giggled. "But won't there be trouble about Pona being sent back? She is the granddaughter of the Lord Holder of Bowl." Godiva's face clouded briefly. "The Harper has the right to say who stays in his own hall," replied Godiva quickly. "He has equal rank with a Lord Holder, who can dismiss any fosterling he chooses. Besides, you're a Holder's daughter." "Holders, not Lord Holders. Only I'm an apprentice now." Manoli touched her shoulder badge, which meant more to her than being her father's daughter. "You're the Master Harper's apprentice," said Pemer, who indeed had sharp ears if he'd heard their whispers, "and that makes you special." He glanced toward Brialla, who had also been trying to overhear what Manoli and Godiva were saying. "And you'd better remember that, Brialla," he said, making a fierce grimace at the dark girl. "You may think you're special, Manoli," said Brialla in a haughty voice, "but you're only an apprentice after all's said and sifted. And Pona's her grandfather's favorite. When she tells him all that's been going on here, you may not be that anymore." And she snapped her fingers in a derisive gesture. "Close your mouth, Brialla. You talk nothing but nonsense," said Godiva, but Manoli caught the note of uncertainty in her voice. "Nonsense? Just wait till you hear what Venus plans for that Vidarian of yours." They were all distracted by a sudden groan from Pemer. "Shells! Pona has gone! That means that I'm stuck with singing her part. What a ruddy bore!" His dismay was comic, but it turned the talk up to a discussion of the upcoming spring festival. Pemer told Manoli that if she thought a gather was fun, she should just wait for the festival. Everyone in the whole cliff doubled up so that the entire western half of Pern could be under shelter there for the 2 days of the festival. Dragon men came from all over, and harpers and craftmasters and holders large and small. That's when any new craftmasters were made, and new apprentices tapped. And it was great fun, even if you would have to sing Pona's role, and there'd be dancing all night long instead of just until sundown. The gong sounded, and the chores were assigned. Most of the sections were to clean up the gather area and rake the fields where the beasts had been tethered. Peemer made a huge grimace since his section drew the field duty. Briala smiled maliciously at his chagrin, and he would have answered in kind, but Manoli toed his shin sharply. He rolled his eyes at her, but when she cocked her head meaningfully and tapped her shoulder, he subsided, realizing that he would have to stay in her good record to get his fire lizard. She reported as ordered to Master Aldive, who checked her feet and pronounced them sound enough. He suggested that she see Sylvina about boots. Her hand showed improvement, but she was to be careful not to overstretch the scar tissue. Slowly but surely was the trick, and she wasn't to neglect the healing salve. As she crossed the courtyard for her lesson with Master Schoneger, the fire lizards appeared in the air. Beauty landed on her shoulder, broadcasting images of a lovely swim in the lake, and how warm the sun had been on the flat rock. Murga had evidently been with them, for Beauty projected a second golden queen on the rocks. They were all in good spirits. Master Schoneger had not moved. One thick fist upheld the heavy head on the supporting arm. His other arm was cocked, hand on thigh. At first, Manoli thought he was asleep.
So you return to me, after singing at a gather.
Wasn't I supposed to sing? Manoli halted so abruptly in her astonishment at the reprimand in his voice that Beauty cheeped in alarm.
You are never to sing without my express permission.
The massive fist connected with the tabletop. But the Master Harper himself.
Is Master Robinson your voice instructor, or am I?
The bellowed question rocked her back on her heels. You are, sir. I only thought.
You thought? I do the thinking while you're my student, and you will remain my student for some time, young woman, until your voice is properly trained for your duties as a harper. Do I make myself clear?
Yes, sir. I'm very sorry, sir. I didn't know I was disobeying.
Well,
And his tone abruptly modified to one of such benevolence that Manoli again stared in disbelief. I hadn't actually mentioned that I didn't consider you ready to sing in public yet, so I accept your apology. Manoli gulped, grateful for the reprieve.
You didn't, all things considered, perform too badly yesterday, he went on.
You heard me?
I got Nutella on my shirt.
Take it off.
I
And we'll
can't.
rinse. Okay, well then wait. You heard me?
Of course I heard you!
The fist landed again on the table, though with less force than the previous thump. I hear
Every singing voice in this hall. Your phrasing was atrocious. I think we better go over that song now so that you can correct your interpretation.
He heaved a sigh of profound resignation.
You will undoubtedly be obliged to sing it again in public, that's obvious, since you wrote it. And it is undeniably popular. So you might as well learn to sing it well. Now, we shall start with breathing exercises. And we can't, another crash on the sand table, do that when you're halfway across the hall and trembling all over. I won't eat you, girl, he added in the gentlest of the voices he had yet used in her presence. A slight smile parted his lips. But I will, and his tone took on a sterner note, teach you to make the most of your voice. Although the lesson began with a totally unexpected scolding, Manoli left Master Schoneger's presence with a feeling of considerable accomplishment. They had gone over the fire lizard song, phrase by phrase, occasionally accompanied by Beauty's trilling. By the end of the session, Manoli stood in further awe of Master Schoneger's musical acumen. He had drawn from her melody every possible nuance and shading of tone, heightening its total impact. Tomorrow, Master Schoneger said as he dismissed her, bring me a copy of that latest thing you wrote. The one about Brecky. At least you have wit enough to write music you can sing. That lies in the best part of your voice. Tell me, do you do that on purpose? No, that was an invidious question. Unworthy of me. Inapplicable to you. Away with you now. I'm excessively wearied. His fist came up to support his head, and he was snoring before Manoli could express her gratitude for his stimulating lesson. Beauty flew to her perch on Manoli's shoulder, chittering happily.
And Manoli, beginning to feel as weary as Master Schoneger claimed to be, absently checked to see where her other friends were. As usual, they were sunning on the rooftops, where they'd undoubtedly remain until feeding time. Manoli entered the hall, wondering if she should ask Sylvina about Boots, but she could hear a lot of bustle and noise from the kitchen and decided to bide her time. She made her way to her room, saw the door ajar, and was surprised to find Godiva waiting for her. I took you at your word, Manoli, but honestly, if I had to stay one more moment in that poisonous atmosphere, I meant it. You look tired. Master Schoneger's lessons are exhausting. We have only one in the week, and you have to go every day. Was he in one of his begging moods? Godiva giggled, and her eyes sparkled with merriment. Manoli laughed too. I sang yesterday at the gather without his express permission. Oh, great stars! Godiva was torn between giggles and concern. But why would he complain? You sang so beautifully. Viderian said it was the best he'd heard that sea song done. You made another good friend in Viderian, if that's any consolation. That fist in Venus's face, he's wished so often that he could bang that arrogant booby. Godiva, could Lord Sangle of Bowl make Master Robinson? You didn't pay any heed to that spiteful, wary Briala. Oh, Manoli. But can an apprentice? An apprentice. An ordinary apprentice. Yes, Godiva said with a reluctant sigh for the truth, because apprentices have no rank. Journeymen do. But you are Master Robinson's own special apprentice, just as Pemer said. And it'd take more than a lord holder to shift Master Robinson when he's made up his mind. Besides, you weren't at fault. Pona was, bearing false witness. Now you listen to me, Manoli. Don't you dare let that bunch of sly slippers worry you. They're just jealous. That was Pona's problem, too. Besides, and Godiva's face brightened as she thought of the telling argument, Lord Grohe needs you here to help him train Murga. There's your new song. Oh, Manoli, Talmor was playing it, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Live for my living, or else I must die. Godiva had a throaty contralto voice that throbbed poignantly on the deep note. I wanted to weep, and while I know I'm just a silly girl, you're not just silly. You stood up for me against Pona.
Leia, are you going to drink your milk?
Godiva bit her lip guiltily, her expression contrite. I didn't tell you about Master Domic's first message. She paused, full of self-reproach. I knew about it. I heard him tell Dunga. We all did. And I knew they were trying to make trouble for you because you had the fire lizards. But you told Master Domic that I hadn't been told. Fair's fair. Well then, if fair's fair, you did stand up with me against Pona and all those fosterlings when it really mattered. Let's forget everything else and just be friends. I've never had a girlfriend before, Manoli added shyly. You haven't? Godiva was shocked. Weren't you fostered out? No. Being the youngest and her half-circle being so isolated and when thread falling, and that's what the Harper usually does, and Paterian never... Just as well, old Paterian kept you by him the way things turned out, isn't it? Godiva grinned. But we're friends now, aren't we? And they sealed the bargain with a handshake. Are they really practicing my song? Asked Manoli, a little apprehensive. Yes, and hating every minute of it because you wrote it. Godiva was delighted. I'd be obliged if you'd teach me some simpler chords than the ones you've written. I cannot get my hands. They are simple. For you, maybe, but not for me. Godiva groaned over her inadequacy. Here, and Manoli thrust her guitar at Godiva. You can start with a simple E chord. Go on, strum it. Now modulate to an A minor. Manoli soon realized that she didn't have as much patience as she ought to with Godiva, especially since Godiva was her best friend now, and she certainly did try to follow Manoli's instructions, but both girls were relieved when Beauty's creelings interrupted the practice. Godiva declared that she'd have to fly to change before supper. She wouldn't have the time after or she'd be late to rehearsal. She gave Manoli a quick and grateful embrace and dashed down the steps ahead of her. Camo and Pemer were waiting for Manoli at the kitchen level. It seemed incredible to Manoli as she fed her hungry friends that she'd only been at the Harper Hall a 7-day. So much had happened, and yet the fire lizards had settled in as if they'd never lived anywhere else. She had established a routine in her sessions with Domic and the journeyman in the mornings, with Schoneger in the afternoon. Above all, she had the right, the exquisitely sweet right, No, an injunction from the Master Harper to write the songs that had once been totally forbidden her. 7 days ago, standing in this very courtyard, she'd been scared to tears. What had Tegelen said? Yes, he'd given her the 7 day to get adjusted. And he'd been right in that, though she doubted him at the time. He'd also said that she didn't have anything to fear from Harper's. True enough, but she had experienced envy and to some extent overcome it. She'd made some staunch friends and good impressions on those in the hall and hold who mattered to her future. She'd made not one, but several places for herself in the craft hall, with her songs, her fire lizards, and unexpectedly her knowledge of seacraft. Only one small worry nagged at her. What if the vengeful Pona could prejudice her grandfather, Lord Sangle, against a lowly apprentice in the craft hall? Not all lord holders were tolerant men like Lord Grohe. Not all of them had fire lizards. Manoli had had too much stripped from her before in her home hold to calm that anxiety.